Welcome to the wonderful world of bread making with your new West Bend bread and dough maker. To ensure success every time, I'd like to familiarize you with the bread maker and with the bread making process. But before I begin, let's review a few basic tips and guidelines when using your new bread maker. First, always read the instructions carefully. A recipe book with care use instructions has been included for your benefit. And when using the product, keep these simple thoughts in mind. Always place the unit on a dry, stable countertop or table that is heat resistant. Good ventilation is critical in making good bread. Never cover the unit during operation. Follow the instructions and recipes carefully. The most important step in making bread is measuring the ingredients accurately and then using them in the order listed in the recipe. And last but not least, don't touch the control panel buttons after the bread maker has been turned on. This interrupts the cycle. With those thoughts in mind, let's take a closer look at the many special features and parts of the West Bend bread and dough maker. The bread pan has a number of special parts and is protected with a super slick premium non-stick finish. The arrows indicate how to twist it in place in the oven chamber. The bread pan should never be immersed in water or placed in a dishwasher. To clean it, simply put a small amount of water and soap inside, wash with a soft cloth or sponge, rinse, and then dry with a soft cloth. The knead bar easily fits in the bottom of the pan. The cover is removable for cleaning and it slides right off. The electronic control panel is the bread maker's brain. It's very important you understand what each button does and the options that are available to you. The Bread Select button lets you choose 2 different bread settings as well as a dough setting. With each press of the button, the menu settings and the time required to complete each setting appears. Let's just walk through the selections. Basic takes 3 hours. The whole wheat setting takes 3 hours and 30 minutes. The dough setting is the shortest cycle. It takes only 1 hour and 20 minutes. Our next selection is the Bread Color button. We can choose from 3 different crust colors. With each press of the button, choose from light, medium, or dark. If you like to wake up to fresh bread in the morning, the timer buttons for delayed start is the perfect answer. The timer can be programmed to delay the start of the bread maker for up to 13 hours. The Start-Stop button turns the bread maker on and off. A red signal light under the word ON will glow, and it will remain lit until the bread maker is turned off. To turn the unit off, press and hold the Start-Stop button down for about 3 seconds or until the on light goes out. The process time also begins to count down in minutes, so you always know how much time remains before the bread is done. Once the bread is done, an audible alert sounds. If the bread is not removed from the bread maker immediately after baking, it will automatically go into a keep warm mode for up to 3 hours to keep the bread deliciously warm. Now that we've reviewed all of the features of our West Bend bread and dough maker, let's make a loaf of country white bread, a 1.5 pound loaf. It's featured in your recipe book. Also, if you have any questions about anything we've discussed, please closely read the care use instructions in the front of your recipe book. Okay, let's begin by adding 1 cup of lukewarm water to the bread pan. Now don't use warm or hot water because that would kill the yeast. And remember, it's very important to measure the ingredients accurately. For the liquids, a see-through measuring cup is best. The liquid level must be right to the measurement marking at eye level. Our next step is to add 2 3/4 cups of flour. It's very important to measure the dry ingredients accurately. We suggest that you spoon the flour into the dry measuring cups and then level it off. Then add 2 tablespoons of dry milk, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt to the bread pan. The tablespoon and teaspoon measurements should also be level. Tap the pan to settle the dry ingredients. Push some of the flour mixture into the corners. Then make a slight well in the very center for the yeast to be added later. Moving on, divide 2 tablespoons of butter or margarine into 4 equal pieces, placing a piece into each corner of the pan. It doesn't matter if you prefer margarine or butter, since they're interchangeable and they can be used right from the refrigerator. Our next step in the recipe is to add 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast to the very center of the pan, right where we made our slight well. This area protects the yeast from becoming wet. Of course, you should always check the expiration date on the yeast to be certain it's fresh. There's more information on yeast and the types to use in your recipe book. Now we're ready to put the bread pan into the oven chamber. We recommend that you put the dry ingredients into the pan outside of the chamber so you don't accidentally spill inside the chamber. The bread pan locks in place and then we close the cover. We program the bread select for basic. Then we choose our bread color for the crust. I prefer medium. Press the Start-Stop button to turn the bread maker on. The on light will glow when the bread maker is on. While we wait for our bread to bake, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about bread mixes like the one that was packed with your bread maker. Pre-packaged bread mixes are easy to prepare. However, just remember to check the expiration date for freshness, and like the recipes, make sure you follow the instructions carefully. Always add the recommended amount of liquid to the bread pan first, then the flour mixture, tap, make a slight well, and add the yeast on top. Make certain that if you're using a 100% whole wheat or a natural grain mix, that you select the whole wheat setting. And don't forget to select the desired bread color. Now, if you'd like to save time and money, you can prepare your own bread mixes ahead of time and store them in the refrigerator. Simply measure all the dry ingredients, accurately of course, into a plastic bag. Don't add the yeast, and then close with a twist tie. Label what type of bread and the size loaf. When you're ready to make the bread, simply add the liquid ingredients to the pan as the recipe directs. Add the dry mixture and level. Then add the butter or margarine and the yeast on top. Making bread is really quite simple if you just remember the golden rules. Don't take shortcuts, and always measure ingredients accurately and add them in the correct order. Now, sometimes things just don't go as perfectly as we'd like, and then what do? Well, I'd like to show you some of the more common problems we see when people begin to make bread. Let's review some troublesome areas. For example, if your bread collapsed while baking, you probably didn't measure the liquid accurately. If your loaf is mushroom in shape, you probably added too much yeast or perhaps the wrong type of yeast. If your loaf looks like a gnarly, knotted oak tree, you probably didn't use enough liquid. Does your loaf look short? Perhaps you didn't use the right type of flour, or maybe the liquid was too hot. And last, if your bread doesn't slice easily, if it seems sticky, you probably didn't allow the bread to cool for the recommended 15 to 30 minutes. I've covered a few common problems in baking bread. If you're having trouble, please refer to the front section of your recipe book. 15 problems and their solutions are described. If you're still feeling frustrated, call the West Bend toll-free helpline. The number is printed on the front of your recipe book as well as on the back of the bread machine. Oh, our bread is finished. An electronic tone alerts us that the cycles have been completed and the bread is ready. So we simply remove the bread pan from the oven using a pot holder. We invert the pan to remove the bread. And again, we need to allow the bread to cool on the rack for at least 15 minutes. Time's up, and we're ready for the best part of making bread at home. Absolutely delicious. Thank you for joining me, and enjoy your new West Bend bread and dough maker.